Cruzamos fronteiras e desenvolvemos relacionamentos duradouros. Acreditamos no talento das pessoas, na igualdade e na diversidade. Unimos forças para construir novos mercados. Avançamos em pesquisas para criar valor de forma segura e sustentável. Temos um compromisso com o futuro das pessoas e do planeta. Fornecemos um bem essencial para a sociedade: energia. Somos energia responsável, pioneira e transformadora. Somos energia para criar o amanhã.
Hi everyone. Please can you confirm, Dennis, that you can hear me? Dennis, can you hear me? Oh, great. So, good morning, everyone. My name is David Murray, and I'm excited to welcome you all to this incredible lecture, which we presented by Dennis Scott. I'm David Murray, and I'm a student of the State University of Campinas. I'm currently volunteering as the Public Communications Director of the SP Unicamp Student Chapter. And this is going to be our keynote lecture for the 13th World Oil Workshop at Unicamp. So first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for making it to this section. We are very excited to have everyone. This workshop promises to host quite incredible presentations. We're going to have a lot of trainings, and it's going to be very insightful, and I look forward to enjoying every moment of it. So the SP Unicamp Student Chapter was created with the mission of disseminating and exchanging technical knowledge about the oil and gas sector, which is rapidly transforming. And we hope to continue to maintain a good contact between the academia and the industry generally. And that's really the major aim of why the energy workshop or the petroleum workshop was created. Today we're going to have Dennis talk about a very important topic. This topic is very, very, very important because I mean we're at a very delicate moment of the energy industry, and a lot of questions are arising about sustainability and why we should really invest in sustainability. But before I go into that, I would like to acknowledge all our partners in the workshop. I'd like to thank the ESS Oil and Gas, IBP, that's the Brazilian Oil and Gas Institute, CMG, that's the Computer Modeling Group, as well as this Unicamp Center for Petroleum Studies, CEPETRO, and the SPD Brazilian section. I will fail to acknowledge the AAPG for accepting to let us host this distinguished lecture in our workshop as well. And we really appreciate all the support and contributions to the success of this workshop. I will also fail to acknowledge the very excellent team here at the executive branch of the SP Unicamp Student Chapter for their incredible devotion to ensuring that this event is a success. So without wasting so much of our time, I'd like to give a brief introduction to our speaker of today. There's so much to say, really. Then Scott is the president of Storm Energy Limited, where she's responsible for evaluating projects related to energy in general. She's had over 30 years experience specialized in carbon reservoir characterization and the application of technology to maximize recovery of reserve. She served as president of the AAPG, and I think that's when I first met her when she visited Nigeria back then at the NAPI conference. And I must say that it's been an incredible encounter with her. It was a very life-changing moment for me after listening to her talk about something related to the subject as well at NAPI. And I'm very excited to have her and listen to her again talk about this incredible subject. She received a BSc from the University of Binghamton and as well MSc from the University of Colorado. She's a certified petroleum geologist and a licensed geologist at the state of Miami. And she's been incredible. Actually, she's contributed to several projects targeted at encouraging and improving participation of the minority groups and inclusion of women in geosciences. I mean, there's so much to say about her, and I can't wait to let you all have a bit of that amazing encounter. So, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat button below. I'm sure you should have a lot to ask, and I would hand over the stage to Dennis to start up the lecture. Thank you so much, Dennis, for letting us have you.
Thank you, David, for that very kind introduction. I'm going to start sharing my screen now. One moment. And if you'll mute yours, I can hear myself talking through your screen, so make sure that you're muted. And that should bring up my screen. Enter. David, can you confirm that you are all seeing my presentation now? I can see it, so you should.
Yes, we can see you.
All right. So I first would like to thank the AAPG Foundation, who funds the Distinguished Lecture Program, and the staff at AAPG for all of their help coordinating the Distinguished Lecture Program, especially the committee who identified the importance of sustainability. This talk is actually, you all get to test out a part of my first talk. We'll do a follow-up talk next Wednesday live. That'll be the full extent of what I'm talking on for sustainability. But I'm very honored to share some of this information with you this morning, and I've personalized it for Brazil just for this group. So today's conversation will talk about three things: sustainable development and energy realities, the cost benefit of energy, and a few energy transition realities. So let's go right into sustainable development. You should all memorize this. Humanity has the ability to make development sustainable to ensure two things: that it meets the needs of the present. We don't talk much about this, meeting the needs of the present. What we tend to focus on without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their own needs. But I'm going to challenge all of you here today to really look into the 17 UN sustainability goals and understand it is a dual purpose, making sure we have what we need today and that in future generations can meet their needs. And to all of you that are geoscientists and engineers, you are essential to meet the sustainable development goals, not only for the present, but absolutely for the future. So let's talk about one of the most important things when we're talking about energy. There are 7.9 billion people on this planet that need energy today. That's our job. I wake up every day saying, my job is to make sure we have access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy. But let's take a little look back in time. In 1804, this planet had only 1 billion people. By 1970, that had increased to 3.7 billion. We have doubled that in 50 years, from 3.7 billion to 7.9 billion today. And we project that there'll be 10 billion on this planet by 2057, people that need energy. When you see all these predictions about net zero and goals for 2050, what we're saying, we're setting goals to make sure 10 billion people on the planet have access to energy. So let's talk about a few energy realities. This data is from the International Energy Agency. It's all publicly available, and I'll make my slides available after the Distinguished Lecture talk next week. It'll all be online on AAPG, and I encourage you to go out to these websites. But let's start getting a feel for where the world stands with energy. On this chart, we're looking at energy from 1971 to, as of these slides, 2019. The new Energy Outlook just came out, and hopefully I'll get that updated by next week too. But this is what I want to focus on. In 1970, we had 3.7 billion people, and that required about, this graph is in exajoules on the y-axis and years on the x-axis. but not many of us can relate to exajoules. So I've converted what this is. Basically, we were needing 37, almost 38 billion barrels of oil equivalent back in 1971. And today, we need almost 100 billion barrels of oil equivalent of energy to meet the needs of 7.9 billion people. And what's interesting to me, that's a 62% increase. But let's see how we're doing that. Over on the right of the graph, coal is still providing 27% of our energy. Whoops. Oil, 31%. Natural gas, 23%. And less than 20% nuclear, hydro, biofuels, and other, including wind and solar. So if you take nothing else away from this talk, other than there are a lot of people that need energy, know that 81% of the global energy needs are met by fossil fuels. That's our job. My job as a petroleum geologist. That's our job as energy and engineers and geoscientists. That's our job as people to make sure that everybody has access to energy. So now I'll switch to Central and South America. We'll just look at the statistics from the global to Central and South America, and then down to a Brazil level. And we see a similar type thing. The energy mix is still oil. Interestingly, very large biofuels and waste. And that is a changing technology, changing terminology, what biofuels and waste includes. And that's not only biomass, but liquid, man-made liquids. Let's see, so oil, biofuels and waste, wind and solar is this very small wedge, very small amount of wind and solar in Central and South America. Hydro is dominant. Nuclear, this very thin green line coming through here. Natural gas continues to be a great source of energy. And then coal, very small sliver of coal. So that's the energy resource. Now I want to look at how we generate electricity. So one is resource and the other is electricity. And if we look at electricity on our y-axis, we have gigawatt hours. Not that that's going to mean anything to most of us, but it's a different way of keeping track of the energy we use. And on the x-axis will be years. And again, what really stands out for Central and South America is the predominance of hydro energy. Oops. And so I'll finish this section here by talking about how we consume our energy. So in the previous slide, it was how we generated it. Predominantly hydro, natural gas, a little bit of oil and coal, very small wedge of wind and solar, very, very small. But let's look about how we consume it. We consume energy in 4 different ways. Through industry, so that is our manufacturing. Through transportation, the cars we drive, the trucks that deliver our goods. Industry, transport, residential, our home heating and cooling needs, and everything else falls under commercial and public services and non-energy use, things like fertilizer. So let's go down now to the smallest scale, to Brazil, and we see these same trends. If we look at the upper left graph, total energy supply by source, and then electricity generation. And I'm just going to dwell on this one last time. Brazil is very fortunate to have a low carbon form of energy that is meant by hydro. And this is UN Sustainability Goal 7, access to affordable, reliable, and clean energy. And you're meeting the needs with hydroelectric power in Brazil. Almost 45% of your primary energy is met by renewables. And so Brazil has one of the least carbon intensive energy sources in the world. So I'm going to give you all applause. But let's talk about what that means, because this talk is going to talk about not only the benefits, but what are the costs of that, and what are things that we need to be aware of. And the biggest thing we're facing right now globally is global climate change. And right now we're in a period of drought, and Brazil is currently experiencing conditions of drought. And 7 of your 4 main reservoirs, hydroelectric reservoirs, are at their lowest level since 1999. And I put up 2 satellite images from NASA that you can see the height of the reservoir here, Lagos das Brias, and how low it's dropped down in the second photo. The other thing we're facing globally, not only in Brazil, but globally, is deforestation. And I just wrote down some numbers here from 2018 to 2020, the amount of deforestation that's been recorded. And this is an example from Mato Grosso State. And one last thing I want to think about when we're talking about energy, and it's great that Brazil has a hydroelectric source of energy, and you have the infrastructure and your ability to reach a number of populations. But where is that resource with respect to population? Where is the demand, and what other sources are being developed to balance that out? Those are questions for all of you. And AAPG is having a sustainable development contest coming up. And that's one of those questions you as a group should be looking at. What are your sources of energy? If one of you could make a map with all of that information on it that could be publicly available to the schools to educate where your energy is, how it's transmitted, and how it's used, that would be a very beneficial project. And I think that would be a great sustainable development project, communicating the needs of the present. So let's move to cost benefit of energy. On this diagram here, I've shown, well, let me just define this. Why do we use fossil fuels? You know, if there's a lot of negative media about that right now, but the bottom line, it's power density. For a small volume of resource, you get a lot of energy that is created. And that's shown up here as power density, a measure of the average power output per unit area used for generation. So on the upper left-hand part of this quadrant, power density and watts per square meter, we're in hundreds to thousands of watts of energy generated per square meter. That's fossils and nuclear. We can contrast that with alternative energy, which are tens to less than 1 watt per square meter. What that translates to is a very large surface area that is needed for all of these other types of energy. And I put a statistic up here. The world uses about 100,000 billion kilowatts of final energy each year. We use it for transportation, industrial, commercial, and most importantly, for our residential quality of life. So our question is, if we're moving from fossil fuels and nuclear, well, fossil fuels, down to alternative energy, what is that footprint? So let's take a look at that, the surface footprint of power. And this would be a sustainable development goal, to be aware of life on land. For the most part, fossil fuels have been developed and have taken, the surface area they take is less than 0.1% of the surface of all the land on Earth. That small footprint is one of the reasons we've been able to develop so much energy, that and power density. Where we're going to now is above this line, and almost all the energy is going to take up larger and larger surface area. And I will note here, hydroelectric, I'm not picking on Brazil, I'm just noting that it's got one of the highest surface areas of land in use to generate power. But again, here would be another great sustainable development project to really quantify what are those values for each of the countries that you're in. And last, I want to end up this section with energy source and CO2 emissions. We hear a lot about emissions. And so most of what we hear about are carbon-based resource, coal, biomass, natural gas, biomass, traditional biomass. And each of those does have a carbon footprint. And alternative energy has almost no CO2 emissions footprint. But here's my observation is that the carbon intensity right now of all the electricity that we're generating globally has about an average of 475 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. We're still, again, that 81% of oil and gas based on fossil fuels pushes us up in that higher area. So here's what's to consider. The fuel itself is not bad. The resource is not bad. It is the emissions that are produced from combusting that resource that is the problem. And we'll talk about in a little bit later what we can do about emissions. And that's what we need to be thinking. If we're going to address global climate change, it can't be just addressing a total change to a larger surface area of needed for energy. It needs to be addressing the whole package of existing infrastructure and addressing the emissions. Last slide in this section. The levelized cost of energy. So that's all the cost to build a power plant, from its construction, its maintenance, to its decommissioning. Those costs have dropped since the 80s to the present in terms of dollars per kilowatt hours, have dropped significantly. And what I've put on here, fossil fuels are in the range of about 5 cents US dollars, between 5 cents and about, well, we'll just say 20 cents per kilowatt hour for fossil fuels. That's the range that we have been operating in very comfortably with fossil fuels. Oil prices going up. We're at the high end price now. But you can see as we go across this diagram, almost all other sources, hydro, onshore wind, bioenergy, solar, geothermal, offshore wind, all fall within or lower than the high end fossil fuel price. This is the first time we are finally getting to a point where alternative energies are competitive with fossil fuels. And I've just added this in the slide, those actual numbers. We're in that 5 cents to almost just under 20 cents for the most expensive alternative energy. So let's talk now. I'd like to switch to energy transition realities. And I like to look at this because we're going to look at some headlines, because the media has its own view of what the physics, geology, and engineering of the energy transition is. And we need to explore this. So public and institutional pressure are what causing a transition from fossils to alternatives. And IEA, again, the International Energy Agency report, talks about options, but it also talks about warnings. And the bottom line is we need companies ES and governance. Those are 3 parts of sustainable development. You economically develop the resource with attention to the environment and the societal component that's addressed by that energy. And what I really like seeing, and I'd use this example that just came out this past August in Colombia, that sustainability strategies are now commonplace for all companies dealing with energy. You can no longer just look at the cost of developing energy. It has to be the cost and balanced environmental, social benefits of developing energy. And the last, this is probably what made the tipping point for moving a sustainable development of energy, is that financial institutions are now investing in clean energy. And we can see that in this diagram here from Bloomberg. There's a shifting balance of power. And it's best shown, I think, by these graphs. When you're doing a very capital intensive, so it takes a lot of money to drill a well, right? So we need to get outside investment and a return on that investment to do it. That's called market cap. So what we're seeing now is clean energy companies shown by these blue lines. For example, NextEra Energy is now giving more capital for alternative energy than ExxonMobil is getting for development of their conventional oil and gas. Another example, Eni, the Italian energy company, is now being surpassed by Enel. I think in Brazil, you have Repsol is surpassed by Iberdrola. Oh, I'm sorry, Iberdrola. Somebody can correct me later on that one. And one I'm more familiar with in the United Kingdom, Ørsted Energy is investing more money in alternatives than BP. This is significant because markets move strategies. And we have seen that since I became APG president in 2018 and started speaking on sustainability, there was a lot of pushback about it. By the time I finished my year as an APG president, almost every company out there had a sustainability report. And now we see it across the board, all companies. Matter of fact, another fun homework assignment for all of you is to go out on LinkedIn and do a job search on sustainability jobs. Intern level, entry level, managers, directors, sustainability jobs are everywhere on the internet. And for all of you looking for careers, rewarding geoscience engineering careers, having that sustainability component does matter. So one other thing, so as we're shifting from carbon-based fossil fuels to solar and wind, we need energy storage. We also need the technology and the components that go with it. And what we're seeing is a shift in energy resources and a massive growth in strategic metals, things like aluminum, nickel, copper, lithium, and cobalt. That supply is increasing between 30 and 167%, with example of cobalt. And those of you, I can't read all the comments in Portuguese, but those of us that use lithium-ion batteries understand the importance of lithium. And we understand in South America the huge surface footprint that the evaporating ponds for lithium take up. But with that shift toward alternative energy comes something that I don't know that you're all thinking about, and that's a shift in geopolitics. When I started my career many years ago, it was the era of the Arab oil embargo. And that was in the late 70s, early 80s. And that changed the dominance of how we looked at energy and how we protected access to energy in the Middle East. And you can see the number of conflicts and situations that have arisen in the Middle East because of the importance of energy. Well, we're about to shift again. So as we shift from a reliance on fossil fuels to energy minerals, if you will, where are those located? And I've got three charts here. The first one is on rare earth elements or critical minerals. And the predominance of these are in the Asia Pacific region with China. That is the 2018 production, predominantly China. Reserves are predominantly China, followed by Australia. And then Brazil's on here, right here. Brazil currently is contributing to our rare earth elements. Cobalt, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I don't know how many, David, you and I can have this conversation, how many people have tried to travel through Africa. Traveling around one of the largest continents is very difficult. And when you're looking at the majority of your resources, over 50 to 68% coming from inland Africa, there are concerns in terms of transportation. The other place is Australia. And so if you watch the news, you can watch how military presence changes in Asia Pacific. And right now, quiet in the Africa regions, but David, you can correct me if you're keeping track of things going on. I have friends in Namibia, and so far so good there. And the last, I want to talk about lithium. And again, that's something closer to home for us in South America. Lithium reserves currently being developed in Australia, but Chile and Argentina, Chile shown here in green, and Argentina in this red color. The importance of those minerals, make no mistake, it is going to change the environment and the societies that are touched by the development of minerals in those areas. That's another project I'd like to have people really look in in terms of sustainable development. What is being done? What can be done better? And I just included this graph here. It's very busy, very colorful, but the reason I included it is to show what I had mentioned earlier, the predominance of rare earth elements and the metals that are needed for the energy transition are in the Asia Pacific area. And we can look today with supply chain interruptions and extrapolate that to what we need for the next 50 years to be aware that there are going to be issues with access to minerals. Democratic Republic of the Congo, some of the rare niobium here in Brazil, lithium in Chile and Argentina, and then Canada and some of the Rocky Mountains in the US have the minerals. But again, for what we're going to be developing in the near future, Asia Pacific is going to be a very important part of our energy minerals future. And harsh realities. This is from the paper this weekend from the Wall Street Journal. Building facilities and infrastructure is going to take time. And as fossil fuel investment drops, and as is support for funding fossil fuels, renewables are not there yet. They're not ready. We're still 81% dependent globally on fossil fuels. So to switch over to renewables is going to be a problem. Well, I think somebody, just make sure that's, I'm not sure if somebody online is Denise's lecture. Okay. I had to check my phone. All right. Anyway, building facilities and infrastructure will take time. And I want to say that it's not just time. It's going to take time and resources. And while we are getting policies in place to do this, we need to think about the other end. It's supply and demand, responsible consumption and production. It's going to be a battle to get where we need to be by 2050. So just to wrap this up, I want to say that big energy and big technology are part of the solution. It's easy to talk about big anything and make them an us and them. But instead, let's be inclusive. Very, very smart people who want to make the world a better place are working in big energy and big technology. They're also working in small entrepreneurial groups, but we all need to work together. And I'm going to do an example with emissions reduction technology. It's not necessarily the resource, it's the emissions associated with that resource. And let's talk about methane emissions. There's a number of projects being funded by OGCI, the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, to reduce methane emissions in all types of oil and gas operations. And this is an example of drone-based monitoring. I'm really into drones. I live in Panama City, Florida, and we have a group here called Tech Farms, and we build some of the highest technology drones for the military. And they have one that you can actually step into and you can fly around in yourself. I'm waiting for my turn. Okay, back to methane emissions. The other one I'm involved with as Storm Energy is locating orphaned oil and gas wells in onshore US. This is another project I'd like to see done in South America. A lot of the drilling in the northeastern part of the United States was done in the late 1800s, early 1900s, before there were any type of record keeping. And there are many shallow oil and gas wells that were drilled and pipe has stuck in the hole, steel pipe is in the hole, but there's no record that they're there. We can now fly these drones over them and using high resolution aeromagnetics, locate these, and we're currently adding it. This is an example of ground truthing what we've seen, but we can now fly a methane sensor and actually see what is the volume that is coming out of these wells and prioritize them to get them plugged, to reduce the emissions, to affect our carbon footprint. And the last one I want to talk about with big energy and big technology is probably the thing that you'll hear about the most and something that Storm Energy is also working on. And that's carbon capture and storage and carbon capture use and storage. Remember this number, 36 gigatons of CO2 are produced annually. And this graph on this map here shows where those projects are. A lot of the research has been done in the United States and several projects here in Australia, as well as the United Kingdom. But if the average size of a project is 36 million tons per annum, if it's a 36 million ton project, we'll need 1,000 carbon capture projects, 1,000, to sequester 36 gigatons of CO2. We're not even close. So this is probably one of the fastest growing areas. And this is what we're good at. We're subsurface geologists. We're subsurface engineers. We understand the rocks. We understand how fluids flow through those rocks, be they oil, natural gas, carbon dioxide, water, nitrogen. We have a very long history of understanding reservoirs and fluid flow through reservoirs. So I'll highlight the project that you all need to do a field trip, if you haven't done it already, to go to the pre-salt oil field for the carbon capture and storage. It's actually carbon capture use. It's small, it's 3 million tons, but it's actually capturing CO2 from natural gas processing and injecting it back in and using it for EOR. So one last piece of advice to all of you out there, don't get caught up in rhetoric. There are energy realities and energy projections. And here's an example. We have data, let me see if I got here, data from 1990, 2000, 2015, and 2019. We know what the distribution of energy is, predominantly coal, oil, natural gas, a little bit of nuclear, hydro, and renewables. We know the trends. And I love, I'm gonna keep this slide. A number of very, very intelligent people have made projections about what we need to do, what we want to do, what we think we can do. Those are projections. And the thing I'd like to see most is in our modeling and in our decision making, in our analysis, do we go back and see what the error bars are on how we made our projection and where we're doing it correctly and where we're really missing important data. So save that slide. And this is my mantra: projections are not policy. We can say all we want to about reducing emissions, the importance of doing it, set net zero goals, talk about different types of energy. But unless we, as a populace, encourage our governments to make it policy, understanding the importance of fossil fuels and responsibility for their emissions, it doesn't matter. It matters that we follow through on the projections with action to make it policy. Maybe I need to put that in my sentence. All right, busy slide, but I think we're gonna walk through this, and I've got some boxes on it to try and break it around. This is some work by Joel Gill, and he's got a charitable group called Geology for Global Development, and there's a website down here you can visit to get this information, gfgd.org. But our job is this: ensure access to clean and sustainable water supplies. So that's shown, this diagram's in 3 parts. The lowest part is the subsurface, the green part is the surface, and then obviously the blue part up here is the atmosphere. So the first thing they're showing here is the engineering, hydrogeology. This is skewed toward geoscience, but this is all engineering with geoscience. So groundwater and hydrology, ensure access to clean water, critical sustainable development goal. Sourcing and extracting critical minerals. We talked a little bit about that in this talk. Not only extracting them from the subsurface from brines, but mining them in the socially and sustainable way for battery technology. Understanding the subsurface, things like geothermal. I'm surprised there's not as much geothermal in South America as I would have thought, and that'll be part of my talk next week, addressing geothermal. Carbon capture and storage, we touched on this a little bit with offshore CCUS as well as onshore carbon capture projects. This is a very active initiative in the US. We have tax credits to do this, and there are a number of places that are expanding on pilot programs associated with universities. Infrastructure development. This is surprisingly a real high demand area for geologists and engineers, and that is understanding the surface and the subsurface to put in industrial solar and industrial wind. And that's one of the places we're working with in the northeastern part of the US, is when they put in these large industrial energy complexes, is flying our drones over it to make sure that there's no hidden hazards. Mitigating climate change and influencing government policy. That is where we're at. Impacts on the environment, understanding volcanology and landslides. A lot of subsurface activity right now with volcanic eruptions. Understanding past climates. Pay attention to this. It's, you know, what we see in the past in the big framework is important, so we understand how we're affecting, how our CO2 levels today are changing. And the paleoclimatology, glaciology are critical. And last thing, model future outcomes. And this is where we all should be. If you do one thing as a student, take the time to be involved with Earth Science Week, with your schools. Make sure the next generation understands energy the way you do. Science, outreach, and communication is critical. If you're comfortable talking about energy, then talking with non-governmental organizations. I talk to civic organizations, but also talking to government organizations. So I'll end with this. The world continues to use more energy, so we have to be wiser about how we do it. And the UN Sustainable Development Goals are providing a framework for responsible production, transmission, and consumption of energy. And most important, it's about you. Geoscientists and engineers are the essential workers that can help make the energy transition a reality. And with that, I'll say thank you to the State University of Campinas, Brazil, and to the Distinguished Lecturer Program, especially the AAPG Foundation. And if you're interested in additional distinguished lecturers, I'm going to encourage you to request that Maria Angela Capella come speak on sustainability and geophysics. She's done a tremendous amount of work, and we're both working together on a sustainability atlas. So that concludes my talk, and we'll go to the questions. And David, oh dear, look at all these questions you got for me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dennis, for that very, very insightful presentation. I mean, it was so detailed. You brought in a lot of facts and figures about the current realities and how we're looking for the future. And I would like to see what people have to say about all you said. So without wasting time, I'd like us to get into the questions. I have a lot of questions, and Dennis, and I hope that we'll be able to take on this discussion with the time that we have. So the first question here, that's from me. Would you like to read it out, or you're okay reading it out?
I see that. Okay, I'm reading the question in the chat. Are you going to actually read the questions to me? Because I was going to answer the one about solar.
Oh, okay.
I think I have a slide on it. Yeah, I didn't. I'm going to share my screen because this is a fun this is a fun exercise. I don't know. Oh, hang on a second. I have to unshare and share again. Okay. So the question is this. Would like to know the implications of increased solar and wind energy sources on the ecosystem. Everybody is looking into that. Isn't the environmental concerns of the fossil the reason for transitioning? Can you see did my screen come up? No, it didn't.
Not here. Not yet. We can see your screen yet.
Can you see it? Yeah, okay.
Okay. Yes.
I put this slide together because I wanted to understand what would happen. And these are big numbers. So the Earth's surface is, the land mass of the Earth is about 148 million square kilometers, right? And there's some numbers out there that say if we were to supply all of energy with photovoltaics, it would cover 0.4% of the Earth. That's the size of Chile. So to generate energy, we basically would wipe out cultures. And I think that's almost more important. Well, they're balanced of importance. It's not just what we're doing to the environment. When you put in these large industrial systems, you put in roads. When you put in roads, you change migration patterns. You change how communities communicate. You change, the entire ecosystem does change. So the question really was about, does it affect the ecosystem? Yes, it affects both the biologic ecosystem, the animal ecosystem, and the human ecosystem are all affected by these very large projects. Wind is the same thing. It'll cover about 2%. If we had to use only wind, about 2% of the Earth's surface, of the land surface. That's about the size of Argentina. So these are enormous footprints. Oh, my favorite is hydros. You'd have to cover the area of 12 Brazils to generate all the hydro we needed to provide energy for the world. 12 Brazils. It's huge. Okay, next question. Is green energy truly green? I always love that question. That's a real.
Sorry, Dennis. Before we take the next question, I just need to inform our audience about the need to fill in the attendance sheets. If you're on the comment, if you go to the comment section, you see a link posted by the admin. Please kindly just fill in the details, your details, to confirm your presence in the presentation. And if you require a certificate of attendance, you can kindly indicate it in the form as well. Thank you so much. So Dennis, yeah, we can go on to the next question.
Yes. Is green energy truly green? And I always say define green. Define green energy and define truly green. So I'll address, I'm just going to pick one. I'm going to pick traditional biomass. And by biomass, I mean wood pellets. When we're burning a carbon-based fuel, wood, we are making CO2 emissions, and biomass has a high CO2 emissions. I'll just keep going to my slides here. Yeah, so biomass has got almost as high a CO2 signature as a carbon-based system. But what we all do with any source of energy is find a way to offset it. So I don't like using color, green, but if we are making biomass wood pellets, we are growing a resource that is renewable. It is taking CO2 out of the atmosphere as we grow these trees, but then we cut these trees down using fossil fuels. We transport these trees using fossil fuels. We make them, compress them into wood pellets using fossil fuels, and then we package and ship them using fossil fuels and then burn them to create CO2. So the footprint of biomass is extremely high, especially wood pellets. But there are several countries, because they made policy to have X% renewable, I believe it's renewable, I don't think it says alternative. And because trees are renewable, wood pellets meet that criteria. But they don't really, we made a policy that defeats the purpose, right? So I just got an email about that from someone from the UK complaining that we make wood pellets here in Panama City, Florida. And I agree. Although you may offset some of the carbon by replanting, younger plants take up more CO2 than older. I'm not sure you fully offset the entire process. of that. So green energy, truly green, in my opinion, no. And you can do it. You can do that. Matter of fact, there's another exercise for you, and I'm working on this so we can compare notes. Solar and wind, by the time you mine, transport, process, build, transport again, construct, service, and operate, every energy has a footprint. Even though on this one, they look like they're very low, they're probably at least double this. And I think there's a lot of research being done on that. Let me move to the next question. I don't know how we're doing for time. I'll just keep talking. What are your thoughts on repositioning the academic syllabus of our university for transition needs? That's already happening. Almost every university is developing a sustainable development program, but sustainable development with respect to geosciences. How do we understand our sedimentary basins? How do we understand the fluid flow through those basins? How do we understand the extraction of resources? And make no mistake, water is our most precious resource right now. What is the engineering behind water management systems? So yes, that is already happening. And I would encourage you, I need to make a list of this, but if you just do a simple Google, University of Houston, University of Calgary, all the major universities have sustainability programs. Those two, Penn State, I'm more familiar with the North America ones, but I'll do my best to work with our AAPG regions to make sure we have a list of schools with sustainability programs. Somebody needs to translate the next question for me. I'll just go to maybe I should go to the one that's, I can read here. In order to capture the CO2 from the atmosphere, yes. Is CCS the only option we have? Oh, say again?
Oh no, please go ahead. You were already.
Okay, I'm going to answer Pedro's question because it's a very good question. In order to capture the CO2 from the atmosphere, the CCS is the only option we have. Direct carbon capture. Do you think we have time enough to be able to scale up this technology to reduce the cost and increase efficiency? The answer to that is yes. Because it's already, we have, I want to say over 150 carbon capture plants already established. So we are expanding their scale and funding for expanding their scale is happening today. What is the most expensive part of any carbon capture project is actually getting the CO2 out of the atmosphere. So right now, very large direct air capture plants are being built. One that I'm more familiar with in West Texas, the Permian Basin. Oxy Petroleum is building a direct air capture plant. Once we have those built, we can make up for lost time very quickly to get CO2 out of the atmosphere. In the meantime, two things we can do. All energy is good. All responsible consumption, if moderated, is good. And all your ability to do carbon offsets, think about little things. Maybe drive ride share at least once a week, or walk more. Plant a garden, plant trees. I love the tree initiative that right now the SPE has a planting tree initiative. I believe it's with their Gaia initiative. All of these things matter. Stop deforestation if it doesn't make sense. I mean, I'm in Northern Florida and I'm watching some very large scale deforestation happen. I want to make sure it's offset with plantings and growth that offset the amount of carbon that was being sequestered by those trees. I live in an area that was hit by a hurricane. We're seeing devastating effects from the absence of trees. Simple things like the water table is risen, so we have more flooding. Everything is interconnected. So I would say this: yes, we have time, but we must think about all aspects of energy supply and demand. All right. Did I miss a question in there?
I think I have a question here, another question, and this talks about your advice to the emerging geoscientists and petroleum engineers. In our student chapter, we have a quite large number of petroleum engineers. Engineers who core interest relies on petroleum exploration and development. And there's been a lot of panic, in the world lately about jobs, job availability, and the future of jobs in the industry. I know you've talked about people. You mentioned us looking up sustainability jobs, but then the question arises like, okay, I went to university and I studied petroleum engineering, and I was trained to look for ways to recover crude oil. So, what would you advise? How flexible should we be in terms of taking up those sustainability jobs? Do we have those transferable skills to, even though we have a traditional qualifications as petroleum engineers or petroleum geoscientists, are we truly qualified to take up those sustainability jobs? Basically? So, yeah.
Very good question. The question is this, is that we have degrees, be they undergraduate, graduate, or PhD in engineering or geoscience. I'll just be inclusive on this. Should we get another degree in sustainability? It depends where you are, but I would say this, an awareness of sustainability. The book I talked about, this website has got 4 modules. This Geoscience and Engineering for the Future. If you go online to gfgd.org, down here at the bottom, if you go online to that, there are 4 resource modules that you could read about. That awareness of sustainability on your resume tells your employer you understand their strategy to address the energy transition. So I would say that would be my first step, is read what you can online, go to that website, it's free. Maybe it's six resource modules. We could do it as a monthly or bi-weekly class. We could all take it together. I'll take it with you. Okay, I must say that back. I'm too busy. I'll come in. I'll come in and check your work. That's what I would do, is just be aware of sustainability. But the jobs are out there, but they're not where you think they are. I've got another slide. The gig economy is real. So you may not be employed by one of the major oil companies, the Exxon, Chevron, Shells, BP, Sinopec, ConocoPhillips, Hess. You may actually be employed by an insurance companies that are interested in climate change and hazard risk. May be employed by banks that want to understand how to assess value of energy minerals and mining. You may be employed, insurance, banks, investment companies. That's a big one. Those of you that are engineers, there's a really good group in Houston called, maybe I can type it here in the comments, QEDEA. So QED Associates, QED Energy Associates. I think if you Google that, QED Energy Associates, that teaches you what you need to know to work for investment bankers. And then they place you in those investment banking office. The title is engineering tech, but what you are is a data science, working with companies to understand risk and reserves. So there are options. We all have to get out of the mindset that big technology and big oil will come and hire us. We have to go out and find the match for us. And yes, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, IHS, Wood Mackenzie, they're all hiring engineers, they're all hiring geoscientists because they still need to understand energy. It's just much, much harder to get that first job.
Thank you so much, Dennis, for all the resources and advice. That was very insightful advice there. I know that I've had a series of conversations with those doing their masters and PhD, and they've been having that concern of, should I continue? Should I drop out at this point? What's the future? But I believe that with these resources that you've shared, it's really helpful. And one of the things that I've gotten as a personal message is that we need to try to look outside the classrooms. I mean, there are lots of resources out there online, short courses that we could take that could provide potential employers that I don't know the right word to use, but that drive that yes, we're really interested in driving the whole transitional process, just irrespective of the fact that you might have traditional certificates that bear something totally different from what the future might be looking at. I would also like to appreciate, the State University of Campinas, because there's been quite a lot of trends in this direction to improve the curriculum. I mean, this have been activated in various departments, including our department here at the Department of Petroleum Science and Engineering. And I'm looking at probably in the next semester, there's going to be, we started already with the introduction of a course centered on carbon capture and storage. This course kickstarted last semester. It's hosted by the Energy Production Innovation Center here. And there's been quite a lot of tremendous testimonies about this sort of program. So yeah, thank you so much, Dennis, for that. So yeah, another question I wanted to ask. This has more like a business tweak to it, and it has to do with the the media campaign about petroleum. I mean, the world is seeing petroleum as a cancer. I mean, and this is really causing a lot of reduction in revenue stream for some companies and some stakeholders dropping out of the board just because they want to be more eco-friendly and stuff like that. So I was beginning to ask, what do you think that the countries, I mean, this is advices to the countries, government policy, stakeholders and stuff like that. For example, a country like Brazil or Nigeria, for example, that relies heavily on the revenue coming from the oil and gas. What do you think they should start to do differently for the future um, of the energy?
Yeah, I, I would like to make a very strong comment about the value of petroleum. It is the reason our society is where it is today. The reason we have educated generations, the reason that we have clean water, the reason that we have more time is because access to affordable, reliable energy. So the value, you cannot do one without the other. You cannot say, I am here today with energy privilege and I can be responsible for emissions, which is what everybody is really complaining about, is emissions. And we have the technology now to be responsible for that. We have a price structure to be able to do it economically. But most importantly, every company, almost every company out there wants to do this. They have all not just made pledges, they're taking action to develop the energy more sustainably. So I understand there's a hesitancy by the media to believe it, but those of us that have worked in the industry, those of us that have gone to school with each and every one of you, those of us that see your generation coming into the business, we believe in you. We know we can make energy accessible and environmentally and socially acceptable. So I would say we all need to start speaking up. I'm not ashamed that I'm a petroleum geologist. I am not ashamed that I find oil and gas. I'm not ashamed that I'm going to be drilling an oil well in an area that's economically depressed because they want the jobs. These are good things that we do. So it's one of these things, stand up, oops, take pride in it and speak loudly. Go to the schools, go to the city, go to the governments. I can't say it enough. It's the reason I said yes to doing this distinguished lecture series. Because if I don't speak, how can I ask you to speak? If I don't take the time, my graphs, I need some more work, but it matters that I try. It matters that we all get our voice out there. And the media can't be the only one controlling the narrative. We have to speak up and we need to do it together. inclusively to work with the companies with the technology to get where we want to go in 2057 for those 10 billion people.
Thank you so much, Dennis, for that very inspiring response. I'm sure that a lot of people are motivated to do the needed. So we have, yeah, this is a feedback from Tayana. Thank you so much. Uh,
Gracias.
so I guess before we wrap up, I would like to ask this final question. I know you've said a lot of things, a lot of advice, but I would still like to ask, what advice would you have to a younger version of yourself in this whole energy dynamics situation? Think you can
My
help.
advice to my younger self, I'm really thinking about this because I think about what would I do more of. I would believe in myself. I know this is going to be hard to understand. I suffer like everyone else from imposter syndrome. I don't think I'm good enough. I don't think I know enough. It's just the opposite. Believe in yourself. Speak what you know. Correct yourself when you're wrong. Enforce things that you know are right. Reach out to the person next to you and believe in them. Support them. Reach up and say thank you. Reach down and pull someone up and help them. So that would be in my advice. Do more to help others have a voice. I think that's really my message. It's why I'm speaking on this distinguished lecture series. I believe in all of you. I know each of you is going to make a difference, and you will speak for your country. Brazil has got incredible offshore resources, oil that's needed, that can be developed sustainably. Make it happen, all of you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. We really appreciate you putting in so much effort and your time to sharing these resources with us. We really, really appreciate it. We can't thank you enough. I mean, we understand your very busy schedules, and you pointed out earlier that you can't say how much sleep you've had recently, and we really thank you. We don't take this for granted. I guess we'll keep the line of communication open. Please feel free to follow our social media handles at SP Unicamp. And I guess it's okay if people who would like to have future conversations with you reach out to you, probably on LinkedIn, right? I guess that's okay with you. So with this said, you're trying to say something there?
I'm just happy to be here.
Okay. So with this said, I think we've come to the end of this presentation. Thank you so much.
I'll show off all my storm energy paraphernalia. Wait.
Okay, sure.
Okay. So here's my alter ego here. Storm.
Wow. It looks really good.
So I think that, I'm going to just say that too. Have fun. Being a geologist and an engineer, it's fun. Make sure that that's what I call work-life balance. I live to work and I work way too much, but I make it fun.
So we have to work hard and play hard as well.
Yeah, I do.
So yeah, I guess that's it. It's a wrap. Thank you so much, and we look forward to having you again in the future.
All right. I'm going to sign off, and I look forward to seeing all of you. Link me on LinkedIn. See me on Facebook.
Okay. All right.